Good afternoon. Good afternoon, colleagues, students, and guests. I am Dr. Inga Musselman, Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost at the University of Texas at Dallas. And today it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2026 edition of the Polycarp Kusch Lecture Series, Concerns of the Lively Mind. In a few minutes, Dr. Adam Woods, Dean of the School of Behavioral and Brain Sciences, will introduce today's speaker, Dr. Michael Kilgard, Margaret Fawn Johnson Professor of Neuroscience in the School of Behavioral and Brain Sciences and Director of the Texas Biomedical Device Center. But first, I would like to share a little background about Dr. Polycarp Kusch and the lecture series. You may know that Dr. Kusch was a member of our physics faculty for 10 years, from 1972 until his retirement in 1982, first as Eugene McDermott Chair and then as Regental Professor. He came to the University of Texas at Dallas to help build a new university in a cotton field near Dallas, a university that from the outset was destined to be not quite like the ones that were in existence at the time. And this was immensely appealing to him. Dr. Kusch was born in Blankenburg, Germany in 1911. He was educated at Case Western Reserve University and the University of Illinois, and he spent much of his career at Columbia University in New York City, where he was professor of physics. At Columbia, he also took on administrative roles as physics department chair, vice president and dean of the faculty, and then vice president for academic affairs and provost. In 1955, while at Columbia, Dr. Kusch was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics with colleague Dr. William Lamb for their contributions to the knowledge of the atom. In collaboration with another Columbia physicist, Dr. Henry Foley, Dr. Kusch conducted experiments to precisely determine one of the electron's most important physical properties, the magnetic moment. This work has been instrumental in the development of new technology, including magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI. In addition to the Nobel Prize, Kusch was awarded 8 honorary degrees, and he was elected to membership in the National Academy of Sciences, among other honors. A longtime educator, Dr. Kusch was not only an eminent physicist, but also an award-winning teacher. It was reported that Kusch dearly loved his work, especially the teaching. As he once said, "I describe myself as an adequate scientist, but I am a superb teacher." At Columbia, he was chosen to teach an introductory physics course for non-science majors, informally known at the time as Physics for Poets. Columbia awarded him its Great Teacher Award. At UT Dallas, Dr. Kusch was known for his lecture demonstration course, The Phenomena of Nature, for which he assembled a first-rate collection of equipment to show physicists and non-physicists alike just how nature works. Following Dr. Kusch's retirement in 1982, and to honor him, UT Dallas established the Polycarp Kusch Lecture Series, and each spring since 1985, with the exception of 2020, because of the pandemic, one of our esteemed faculty colleagues has delivered a lecture with a theme related to the concerns of the lively mind. And at this time, I would like to recognize the former Kusch lecturers who are here today. Would you please stand? They include Rod Heelis, Larry Overzet, Ram Rao, and Mark Spong. Thank you for coming. Throughout the annual Kusch event, UT Dallas simultaneously honors a former colleague, Dr. Polycarp Kusch, and a current distinguished colleague. And today that colleague is Dr. Michael Kilgard. Dean Woods, please come forward to introduce Dr. Kilgard.
It is an absolute pleasure to have the honor to serve as Dean of the School of Behavioral and Brain Sciences. And part of the reason for that is faculty like Mike Kilgard. I would love to invite everyone sitting back in the nosebleeds, if you'd like, to come down and join us up here in the front, make this an intimate talk and setting in this incredible auditorium. Today, we're in for a real treat. We have one of the best and brightest that UT Dallas has ever had to offer that's going to give us a lecture on his incredible body of work. Mike will be the first to tell you it's not his work alone. Mike often and constantly credits his entire team, an entire center, for the incredible work that they've been able to do and the impact they've been able to achieve. That is the sign of a great leader. Mike is, if nothing else, a great leader who shares credit with his team at all turning points, at all points in times, because he knows that it's not just one person that drives science. It's an entire village, an entire team that drives science. Now, since 1999, Dr. Kilgard joined us here at UT Dallas. And since that time, and ever since, he has embodied the innovative, rigorous, and impact-driven spirit that define not only the School of Behavioral and Brain Sciences, but the entirety of the University of Texas at Dallas. He's a leading science in neuroplasticity. He and his team in the Texas Biomedical Device Center, which he serves as director and chief science officer, have gone on to take work from bench to bedside to meaningful health science impact. And you're going to hear about that today. It is a rare opportunity for someone in their career, especially this early in their career, to take their work from theory to animal studies, all the way up to clinical trials with FDA approval. Many dream of this. Few have ever achieved this. For over 15 years, Dr. Kilgard has led TXBDC, and in its research, it blends neuroscience, bioengineering, and health sciences seamlessly, all focused on the idea of taking work like in the vagus nerve and stimulation of the vagus nerve and driving that as a groundbreaking way to retrain the brain. It's opening new doorways for treatments in conditions that have very few effective treatment options available. The precise, innovative methods have become not only a genuine lifeline for those who need it most, but it's a defining characteristic of the work that Michael and his team perform day in, day out. Consider his work in stroke recovery. Dr. Kilgard led a team that paired vagus nerve stimulation with physical therapy. Years of experimentation and clinical trials culminated in the highest level of validation. In August of 2021, FDA approval for their rehab system in stroke survivors. And while many would have taken that breakthrough as an endpoint, he and the team in TXBDC took that as a doorway to opportunity to impact more conditions and more people in need. As Mike and his team and TXBDC gear up for their next definitive trials, we wait with bated breath to see the full scope of impact their work will bring to patients across DFW and around the world. Mike, you are one of those rare faculty that sees beyond limits and forges new paths beyond our wildest expectations. Thank you for your vision and your never-ending quest for greater impact through rigorous science. You make us better by being a part of BBS and UT Dallas. Thank you. Now, with that, I leave you in the incredible, capable hands of Dr. Michael Kilgard. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the selection committee for this honor. Really, as Adam mentioned, on behalf of the entire UT Dallas family, the Texas Biomedical Device Center. I want to start off by just reiterating some of the comments that Dr. Musselman mentioned about Polycarp Kusch. This notion that we need to understand very simple things, the electron magnetic moment, It was hard to see where that would lead years and years on. But we now know, because we have the benefit of looking back, not looking forward, how it led to changes in our understanding of quantum electrodynamics, eventually in his laboratory, the development of the laser. And we now know what fiber optic communication has done to each of us when it shows up in our home. We now know that that is what connects under our oceans, all of the countries. So we have this thing we know and love as the internet, bringing information to us at the speed of light. Now, a lot's happened at UT Dallas since 1969, but I want to mention what was happening in my family's life in 1969. It was related. One important company, Texas Instruments, was found in this very important university. And one, Chris Kilgard, my father, was saying, I should leave my home and I should move to where those guys in Texas are doing new and big things. And he did that. He moved from Phoenix, Arizona to Houston to begin working for Texas Instruments. And what was the big rush? What was the thing that was so exciting? The thing that was so exciting to him was this idea about transistors. Transistors are going to be big. Not now, but in the future, transistors are going to be important. And again, we now can look back these 50 years and see what that impact looked like. We can look at what Moore's Law has done, and we can see that 10,000 is a big number, but 10,000 million is a much bigger number. So that's where we are in 2020. We've got incredible technologies, and we're not done. We're not finished with that. We're looking forward to the next big technology, the next big breakthrough. My dad actually worked on the oil and gas aspects of the Texas Instruments family. You guys probably know 1901, Spindletop erupts. My wife's great-grandfather, Phil Higgins, finds this bunch of oil down in Texas, and we're now figuring out what we're going to do with all this stuff. And we don't just stay still, just like the transistor doesn't just stay still. Today in Texas, wind energy is 23% of the mix. And we don't know, but people at UT Dallas may lead to this tokamak finally working, and limitless energy coming from joining hydrogen molecules together to make helium. What I learned from UT Dallas and the culture of Texas Instruments that my family was raised in was to think big. We can look at little problems and we can get upset about the small challenges we have each day, but we're challenged to think big about big problems that affect many people. The critical bit is, of course, working together. No one is going to get anything done alone. Never happened. And we've got to solve hard problems. We're not going to find the easy problems. We're going to seek out, challenge ourselves. What hard problem presents itself? I've mentioned information technology and energy, but every family, every person is faced with their own set of hard problems that life presents. And we each have our own choices about how to find other like-minded people to work together to address those problems. I was very young when I first began to be faced by these kinds of hard problems. Here I am, sitting on the step in front of my childhood front door. That's my grandmother, Evelyn Kilgard. We called her Mammy. And she's doing great right there. She's holding my little brother. A couple years later, she's not doing so great. Her brain is not working so well. She has the ravages of Alzheimer's disease. And it's clear that the brain is fragile. That might have been the last time that I was faced as a young person with what happens when the brain doesn't do so well, but it wasn't the last time for me, and almost certainly was not the last time for any of you. That's me in the middle, number 32, all my cousins, and on the left, Cliff is holding Lisa, my cousin who had brain damage at birth, and she was never able to recover. Here's me, the blonde hair in the middle, with one of the two teenagers in recovery who came to live with us for a year each. His name is Danny, and he did not make it through his drug addiction. There's a family photo. That's me in the middle, surrounded by my brothers, and just a whole bunch of family and friends, my parents up above. And it just seemed like a normal group of people, a normal childhood. But you guys all know there's neurons wherever you go. And where there's neurons, there can be challenges. So in this group photo, there's the ravages of Parkinson's disease. There's the effects of alcoholism. There's the effects of autism. There's the clear and impactful consequences of bipolar disorder. Stroke affected this group. Rare genetic disease called Sanfilippo, originally diagnosed as autism. Metabolic disorder. Neuropathy, deafness, and post-traumatic stress disorder. This is just a small group of people at one family photo, and that would happen pretty much any place else you look. Look around the planet, and you're going to find a lot of people who've had challenges. They may not know that that's what the challenge was, but when we dive down and we explore what the root causes of some of the challenges that affect our families, we find out there's underlying biology at play. And for me, that was a hard problem. That was something I could sink my teeth into. something I could continue to try to understand. Now, this picture's taken in the late 1980s, and there was this big new thing back then. You've probably heard of it. It's called DNA. We thought, we're going to figure out the DNA. And once we figure out the DNA, all the problems will fall away in front of us. We kind of have the keys to the kingdom. We know how life works. And it was all true. It's a protein binding to DNA. And I had the good fortune of working for 2 years in high school. My high school job from 16 to 18 was making small sequences of DNA molecules, G's and A's and T's and C's, for a company down in Houston. And the concept was not just to make the molecules, but to think, how do those build together to make the cells? Make the synapses that make the circuits that make the brain regions, make the brain regions that lead to a person who does something. My mom's in the audience. This is an MRI of someone doing a standard task in elementary school. You read off the screen, you see what word is said there, you identify the word, you read it back out, and you can see the 3 brain areas, the visual cortex that identifies the back of the brain. What is the image? It's the word D-O-G, dog. Then the area in the language cortex at the front that's saying, D-O-G, I know that. That's not just those shapes. It's a thing with legs and fur. And then at the top, the motor cortex has to produce that word, dog, and make your lips to make the vibrations that enable you to hear that I'm thinking dog by vibrating the molecules in the air so that you understand what I mean. I thought we'd go from DNA all the way up there, and it would be really helpful. I thought that people who had severe mental illness and neurological problems probably were missing a gene. That seemed like the most likely outcome at the time. I knew that what I really wanted to study was the brain and understand how all these things work, and I knew it was really, really hard and it was going to take a long time. I also knew the brain is really ugly. Like, nobody likes looking at it, no one likes thinking about it, no one likes talking about it. It's just not much fun. So I want to turn the tables on this negative view of the brain. So sad, right? Stroke, Alzheimer's, autism, PTSD. Let's just think about it from the biology textbook point of view. It's beautiful. The most important idea in biology is the idea of cells. That important idea of compartmentalizing information is what makes life possible. DNA is important too, but really cells is the magic sauce. And the cell we care about in the brain is called the neuron, and it's got a bunch of inputs, which we call dendrites, and it's got a bunch of outputs, which we call axons. The picture just shows a few because you couldn't see it if I drew all the real connections. It's 10,000 inputs and 10,000 outputs for every single cell. A staggering amount of connectivity. So we start thinking, what are all these things for? Why do I have so many connections, and why do I have so many billions of these things? Each of you has 86 billion neurons in your brain. What do you do with them? What are they good for? And I would posit that what they're good for is things like this. The neurons thought about, let's build a pyramid. Let's put some crazy head on a lion. Let's do outlandish things. Some of these neurons firing said, I think I can take this bunch of wood and string and make it fly. All I need is the right amount of lift. I need roll, pitch, and yaw, and this thing will fly. That was an idea that the neurons had before it was built in wood. A few short years after coming up with that idea and testing it in Kitty Hawk, we flew to the moon. The ideas that were presented just kept falling away as the technological progress advanced. It was neurons that said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Maybe they were self-evident to everybody else, but certainly they were self-evident to these neurons, put that idea together, and it's persisted many, many years later. My wife and I had the pleasure of being in Vienna, Austria last week, trying to raise some more money to support the research I'm going to tell you about. We got to go to a beautiful concert. And again, someone's hand had to sit and make all these little dots. Think of these patterns of musical activity and produce this information. We saw Kandinsky, we saw Monet, we saw Renoir. So it's a little odd to think about neurons as being us. We weren't raised to think of it that way. I was not raised to think of myself as 86 billion neurons. Probably none of us are. And we typically don't think of ourselves that way. But we have sort of an obligation to understand the magnificence of our own brains and treat other human beings accordingly. This is just a little bit of a demonstration. I love this video. It's only 50 neurons, and they're very sort of baby neurons. They only make a couple connections, 3 or 4 neurons, 3 or 4 connections each. But you can see them reaching out and making friends. It's like freshman year in college, trying to find a roommate, trying to find a friend, make a little network, a couple little groups together. And those networks, those communities, process information. And that information is important, and that information at scale produces this concept we call the human mind. All the things that go with that. We neuroscientists chop it up because that's what we do. We assign different subdivisions. We thought each place would have a job. And so we assign 100, maybe a couple hundred brain areas with Latin terms and all the rest. And we make everybody memorize them. And we really did believe that there would be a job for each thing. The 100 things humans do, there'll be a brain area for each. That turns out mostly not to be true. Many, many brain areas work together to do almost anything you would be interested in doing. Making a cup of coffee, changing a diaper, whatever you're doing, you're probably not using one brain area to do it. The technology has progressed incredibly since I was in high school in Houston at the early stages of this small biotech company. Now, orders of magnitude more technology. We now know we can look at every cell type. And in the brain, there are 5,000 different types of cells, not one. And once again, each cell doesn't do a thing. There's not a cell type for imagination and a cell type for sleeping and a cell type for memory. That's not how it works. We understood the genes. It was a big deal when the human genome came out for many of us. It was a life-changing moment. We now know the entire genome, and we'll never not know it again. Permanent, we know this. And we thought there were 80,000 genes. Turned out there aren't that many, and we were disappointed. There are so few. But 20,000 little machines working together is sufficient to make life. That life could be a tree or a person. And we thought if we understood those, we would then be able to understand all the neurological and psychiatric disorders. But it turned out not to be so simple. We had to really zoom in, this is the hippocampus, and look at individual cells and begin to count them and label them and make them be different colored, unique barcodes, all the rest, and found that there's 86 billion of them. And we thought if we could just understand those 86 billion, we'd be done. And in the last few years, we've learned that's not true. We have to know how they're wired, how they're connected between each other. 86 billion is too simple. We need to think about the real number. And the real number is among these connections 150 trillion. Now, 150 trillion is a large number. Easy to say. You can say Google if you want. But it doesn't mean you really understand something that big. 150 trillion is a large thing. Each one of these is a very sophisticated organ that releases neurotransmitters, that has all the drugs you've heard of. Cocaine, amphetamine are all having their effects in this particular location. And this thing learns and grows in you right now while you're learning what I'm speaking now. So how are we supposed to think about 150 trillion? It's kind of a big number, but there's luckily a way to think of it, and it just happened. It's called ChatGPT. So ChatGPT a few years ago didn't exist, so all of us can see this fast forward of our technology. You can all remember, I think, 2018, when computers were stupid. They only had 100 million connections in the best large language models. When we started jumping them up to 1 billion, they got better. That's GPT-2. And you get up there, boy, at GPT-3, and you start hitting that 100 billion connections. And there's a lot of information stored there. And suddenly, you can talk to it. You have a conversation with it. You can think it's your friend. And we're going up, not quite as fast, but we're almost to 1 trillion. But don't forget, you have 150 trillion in your brain, and you use 20 watts of power to run all that. So there's something really spectacular about how the connections work. And the idea now is that by understanding the connections better, we might be able to first understand mental illness, neurological disorders, and then intervene to make progress. Now, we know how artificial neural networks work because we built them. The math is called backpropagation, send these signals through. Gradient descent is the process of identifying which ones to strengthen, which ones to weaken. That's how artificial neural networks work. That's not how we work. If we did work that way, you'd need a huge air conditioner to keep all of our stuff going. You'd need all these power plants to run it. We have a much more efficient way to do it. And I'll briefly talk to you about some of the biology that others have done to help us understand this. First, before the biology is always the psychologists. They've always done the really hard work. And so Thorndike's law of effect is that responses that produce a satisfying effect in a particular situation become more likely to occur again in that situation, and responses that produce a discomforting effect, something bad, become less likely to occur. Seems kind of obvious, but it was written out in 1905 in very clear language, but no underlying biology. 1949, another psychologist comes along and says, I think I know how the neurons rewire. When there's two neurons, neuron A and neuron B, when neuron A excites cell B and repeatedly or persistently takes part in firing it, some process happens, he didn't know what it was, takes place in one cell or both, so that the efficiency between the two is increased. We call that fire together, wire together. These were the core principles of neuroscience when I began, and they remain the two most important ideas. I won't go through the details, but strengthening the connections is very easy and very fast. Whether you strengthen or weaken is dependent upon the timing within 1,000th of a second. Neurons work on millisecond timescales. They're not megahertz like computers. They're relatively slow, but 1,000 times a second is still pretty fast for me. And we have to decide which ones to strengthen, which ones to weaken. So I'm a better bowler, or I'm a better archer, or I'm a better at doing calculus, or whatever else I'm learning. Critically, in 2015, while TXPDC was working on these projects, we kind of had a major revelation understanding where is that process where the reward signal, the information that comes later, feeds back in. Several seconds it usually takes to see, did that joke land? Did that arrow hit the spot? Did I play the violin note correctly? And that feedback takes a few seconds. It comes in the form of norepinephrine and serotonin, these critical neuromodulators that regulate our behavior. And now we have this better understanding of the synapse, how it works, and we know there's 150 trillion of them, and we know that for many people, their synapses and their brain does not work as well as they'd like it to be. And we want to know, can we take this new information and begin to develop interventions? So the central hypothesis I'm going to present to you today is that most neurological and psychiatric disorders are not caused by a gene that's missing. Some are, but the vast majority are not. They're circuit disorders, and circuit disorders require circuit repair. Okay, you guys want someone repairing your brain, going into your brain and changing your circuits? Probably not, but we get to do that ourselves. So let's think about what we mean by a circuit. One of them you probably know pretty well. You've all been to the doctor. They hit your knee with a little hammer. It stretches your muscles. It activates some cells in your spinal cord. Your spinal cord then activates that muscle to extend so you don't fall down when you're walking. And it also relaxes the opposing muscle so that that leg can come out and not fight itself. For those individuals with a spinal cord injury, this doesn't work so well. Why? They had a car accident, boating accident, got assaulted. Not their fault, but that's what happened. And those circuits are not right anymore. They're not gone. They're typically not cut. That does happen. But typically they're damaged. We call these incomplete injuries. The connections are there, but they're busted, and things are bad, and it's hard to move. You can imagine everything below the side of the injury is going to be impacted, including your bladder. We take for granted control over when to urinate, but if you can't do it, you die. It's really important. And when these circuits are impaired, you cannot control these circuits, and you have serious problems. The circuits become important when you see them lost. They're easy to ignore when they're working well. For motor control, you each got up this morning, got yourself a cup of coffee. Easy, you can imagine me telling you there's wires that do that. But when you get up in the morning after a stroke, and you can't reach out, and your hand won't open, and you can't extend your elbow, and there's nothing wrong with your muscles, it's just it won't work right anymore. You say, I want to get better, and the doctor says, let's go do some therapy. And you do the therapy, and you still have problems. It's the circuit that's the problem. When I speak to you now, I say words so that your ideas will come from my mind into your mind. I vibrate this microphone, it vibrates those speakers, it vibrates the air, and you hear it. But there's a whole circuit in the brain that does that, which we've elegantly mapped out, not me, many others. And again, when there's damage to that circuit, you struggle to understand what that person is trying to say to you. I think you're saying something, but it doesn't really register. Or alternatively, you might understand perfectly, but you can't produce the thing back to the other person. Each of these is a form of prison that makes it impossible to communicate with everyone you know and love. For a number of individuals, again, many of whom I know, the normal machinery that says when you go to the edge, be careful, you might fall off. The threat assessment, watch out, that dog might be rabid. Watch out, that snake might bite you. The normal assessments are not operating correctly. You guys all know the amygdala and the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. These are parts of your brain that are correctly telling you what to be afraid of, because there are many things that are dangerous. In individuals where certain regions of the brain are impacted, they develop post-traumatic stress disorder, and their threat assessment circuitry is not working. And they cannot just snap out of it. They cannot just think out of it. Those circuits control their behavior, and that makes it very difficult to go about with their lives. It makes it very challenging for them and their loved ones to coexist. So I want to talk to you about 3 of these conditions today and the progress that we've made at Texas Biomedical Device Center. The reason we chose these 3 is because we're simple people. Keep it simple. We want to understand what causes them. These are the 3 neurological and psychiatric diseases we understand completely. We know what causes them. You were fine, then you had a blood clot or a bleed, and then neurons didn't get blood, and they died. There's a hole in your head. That's why you have a stroke. It's pretty simple. Spinal cord injury, there's no blood flow problem. It's just car accident, broke your spine, neurons are damaged, Makes total sense. We know exactly when it happened. And PTSD is the only mental illness where we know the day that it occurred. Exactly what happened in all these cases is complicated, but at least the basic cause is not controversial. So the central hypothesis I have mentioned to you is that synaptic plasticity, right? The synapses are those places where neurons touch each other. Plasticity means the ability for them to change from strength 3.8 to 3.9 or 3.7. They can adjust themselves in small amounts to be stronger or weaker. That if we could treat synapses appropriately, we could also treat neurological and psychiatric disorder. But that's not easy. As I mentioned, there's 150 trillion synapses. So can we really do this? Should we even do it? Maybe this is something we shouldn't mess with. Well, we were able to get tens of billions of things on a little tiny chip. It's a lot of angels in the head of a pin. Why would we not be able to do this? Maybe we can even make this tokamak thing to work. Who knows? Why not try? We're not guaranteed to succeed. The chance of success is very low, in fact. But we should at least try. And the reason we should try is we know how to do this because we do it every day. My mom's an educator. I'm an educator. Many of you are educators. We change brains all the time. It's not that hard. Anyone who's parented has changed brains. Should you run the street or not run the street? We tell them don't run the street. And they change their brain, and they're afraid of streets. You can train your dog the same way. Don't have a kid. And the way we do that is over and over. You don't tell them once, stay on the street, you do it again and again. You practice it. You got to get motivation. You got to raise your voice. And you make this improvement in learning how to ride a bike or stay out of the street. What neuroscience has taught us is that improvement in synaptic plasticity, and the practice is that neural activity, all these neurons firing in some pattern with the picture of the street, of the barking dog, or whatever else it is. We now know that the motivation critically regulates the release of neurotransmitters, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, and serotonin, all released in a little burst. So the principles of rehabilitation, like the principles of learning, have been known for 100 years. You got to have high repetitions. They're really challenging. You got to progress it. When they make progress, make it harder. It's got to be individually tailored. We know how to do this. This should work great. After a problem, you should have motivation to get better. You should do rehabilitation, and you should make a complete recovery. Unfortunately, most people have a limited recovery, whether they've got a chronic neurological disease or a chronic psychiatric disease. By definition, the fact that they're chronic means they do not go away. They cannot be cured. You can make progress, but they cannot be eliminated. But that's today. And the question is, if we were to make changes, can we alter that reality? So the key idea here is there's something missing. And what's missing is not a pill. What's missing is a burst of neurotransmitter release that happens on a second scale to help you learn which neurons to strengthen and which ones to weaken. So if I'm bowling and all the pins fall down, I try to do that again. If I say something and everyone laughs, I try to do that again. If I play a note and it matches everyone else's note, I try to do that again. And when it doesn't, I try to adjust accordingly. So these are happening not over hours, but over seconds. Each day, each hour, you're learning hundreds of different things with these discrete bursts of neuromodulator releases. We know the brain areas, we know what they release, we know the biology. All this is extremely well understood. The problem is the brain's hard to change. You have 150 trillion synapses. It doesn't just change willy-nilly. And it certainly doesn't change easily after a stroke or after post-traumatic stress disorder, major depressive disorder, or Alzheimer's disease. These are really hard things to change. One reason we now know is because the neuromodulator systems that allow you to change rapidly habituate. The first few times I'm excited. The therapist was excited. I moved my hand. But over and over and over, I'm doing thousands and thousands of the same thing. It's pretty boring. I don't get enough release of neuromodulators. And that's because the brain is protecting itself from too much change. We needed to find, and we spent the first 10 years here at UT Dallas trying to find a way to trigger these brief bursts of neuromodulators that could enhance rehabilitation effectiveness. When I came to UT Dallas, I had one tool in my quiver, one little arrow that wouldn't shoot very far, and that was a deep brain stimulating electrode. Put an electrode deep in the brain and activate the neurons themselves that you want to activate. Most of you are not ready to sign up to have an electrode put in your brain. And it was selective and fast, and it caused brain changes, but it was obvious it wasn't very safe. We thought, well, let's use these other cool techniques, transcranial magnetic stimulation. You can make a burst of electricity in your brain through your skull. And it's safe, it's fast, but it's not very selective. You activate millions of neurons all simultaneously, not the way we need to do it. As a biochemist, I thought, well, let's give them the right pill. Maybe some amphetamine, maybe some Prozac, fluoxetine, maybe L-Dopa, produce more dopamine. Those things are great. They're selective, they're safe, but they're not fast. Those things are not on for the next hour. How am I going to learn to bowl if I just say learn everything in the next hour? I wouldn't know which things to learn. We got so desperate we tried stem cells, which I'm a big fan of. They just didn't work. They're not terribly safe. They aren't fast, and it's hard to be selected. How would cells work? It's the synapses we've got to get to. It's not that you're missing the number of cells. It's the connections you got to make, and we have to train the circuit to make those connections. So I'll introduce you to the technology we developed here at UT Dallas after a lot of hard work, mostly failing on all the other approaches to find things that could work. And as Dr. Woods introduced you to, the concept is the vagus nerve stimulation. It's selective, it's fast, and it's safe. And I'll walk you through what we mean by this. So, quick anatomy lesson. You got a brain that's got lots of wires that come out of it. There are 12 different cranial nerves. The only one you need to care about for today is the 10th one, the X nerve. And that's the vagus nerve, the longest one in your body. It goes from your brain all the way down to all of your guts, your organs, your heart, your liver, your spleen, pancreas, all the rest. Now, what we need to know about it in terms of stimulation is it's very safe. We've already been using it, a company in Houston, for almost 20 years now, showed you could stimulate it for people with epilepsy and reduce seizure rates by 50% in 50% of people. So a big success. And they deliver a lot of stimulation, like 24 hours a day for the rest of your life. We demonstrated at UT Dallas that it produces a very brief, transient, fast burst to release these neuromodulators, and that pairing stimulation, these little half-second bursts, with a particular sound increases the number of neurons that respond to that sound, or the particular movement increases the number of neurons that produce that movement. Interestingly, most people don't even notice this happening. You're rewiring your brain, and you don't even feel it. Those are the big four for our purposes. So the concept then is, instead of a normal rehab session where you do all the work and you don't make any changes, what if we could kick it up a notch? Where at the moment you're doing these trials, every one was like the first one. Every one was really impactful. Every bit of the cognitive therapy you had, or the memory training you had, or the occupational therapy you had, if every bit worked, every therapist loves this idea. Yeah, let's make more plasticity to make this work better and faster. That was the concept. So we know how movement works, for example. Neurons fire, they make your arm move. When I open my hand, neurons are telling it to do that. It's not complicated. But when there's damage to my neurons, now my hand won't open and my movement is impaired. But the movement's still there. These are incomplete injuries, and so I can still move a little bit. So if I could measure the little bit of movement, activate the burst of vagus nerve activity, which would trigger the release of neuromodulators, which would drive that synaptic plasticity I described, which would strengthen the neural activity and improve movement, we would call that closed loop vagus nerve stimulation. We're not just blasting a nerve. We're sending specific bursts of information in about when is that muscle you want to be activating moving and when are other muscles not. So the idea is that rehabilitation plus motivation alone leads to limited recovery. Is it possible that rehabilitation plus vagus nerve stimulation could lead to greater recovery? Can we really make directed changes to these synapses? Started this in 2009, when I was an engineer, and a whole bunch of just fantastically talented PhD students here at UT Dallas did the hard work of testing this out, and I'll spare you all the details, but yes, you can reorganize the brain using vagus nerve stimulation. So I won't go through the change in the auditory system, the motor system, synchrony, neurons respond to speech sounds, and all the rest. What we really wanted to do began in 2013. We started in earnest to say, can I use this technology to treat first animals who have serious problems with their brains? And again, a whole bunch of people signed up, said, hey, is Rob Renniker going to be codepressed? And just said, let's try this. Might not work, but if it did, it would change the world because we'd have a technology to treat things that are currently untreatable. So we did all kinds of damage to the brain. We love the brain. These are rat brains. We produced brain injury, and brain injury produces a problem. So this animal is going to have trouble reaching out and grabbing that little handle. He's only able to produce a few grams of force because his hand won't work right. It won't close around the handle. It won't pull. Trying with rehab didn't help it, but when you try with rehab plus vagus nerve stimulation, now the animal can make a good firm grip. And every doctor will tell you the best prognosis you can give a stroke patient is just shake his hand and find out if he's got a good firm grip, he's going to do pretty good. If he doesn't have a good firm grip, I don't need to know too much else. The prognosis is poor. We were able to make a stronger grip. We do lots of animals. We run through this over and over. We make sure we got it right. The stroke is bad for you. You add the rehab. Rehab helps get you a little bit better. Add the vagus nerve stimulation, you make more gains. And the gains you make are permanent. You don't need the vagus nerve stimulation. Those are just there to help you find the connections. Once they're there, you get to keep them forever. Here's another animal in terms of speed, very quickly, pushing this lever down and back up and back down. Rats are fast. They can play the piano almost. But after a stroke, in this case a hemorrhagic stroke, everything's slower. Doesn't really work right. So it's a different task. In this case, The animals don't make any progress with rehab unless there's vagus nerve stimulation to help them find the connections. Here's one with traumatic brain injury, another cohort of animals. Again, you hit motor cortex, damage their ability to move, they don't make any recovery, rehab doesn't do anything for them. You add this burst, this information, and they can make a recovery they couldn't otherwise make. We did this in old animals. We did this long after injury. We did every possible combination we could. We even tried spinal cord injury. We really didn't think this would work. But we got some funds together and we said, let's try it. And we saw with 3 different animal models, 3 different levels and severity of injury. In each case, you want to be in the group that's the red group who gets the VNS, not the group who's working hard and not making very much progress. Because these are animals, you can measure the connections between each of these things, right? They get sacrificed in the end. We open them up and we look. When they're anesthetized, we can stimulate neurons and see them make these movements. We can inject the muscles and actually count the cells that are connected to each muscle, follow the wire from point A to point B, and understand the connections perfectly. I won't get into all the details, but in 3 different models, you can double the number of neurons that produce this movement. And when you measure the anatomical connections in the spinal cord, again, you can double or triple the number of connections. We know where the strength comes from. It's because the connections are restored. And rehabilitation alone will not produce that type of recovery. Evolution did not prepare us for spinal cord injury. In the jungle, you just die. There's no ICU out there on the savannah, and we're not good at recovering from injury. But with a little help, you've already seen the kinds of gains that can be made. But can those gains be made in people, or is that just some rat thing? Chances almost certainly are this will not work, because lots of things worked in rats and didn't work in people. So we said, we'll try. If there's a 1% chance, we'll give it a shot. Signed up a bunch of great people who said, let's give this a shot. I'll try that. That seems kind of crazy. What else have I got to do? Jane Wigginton, our chief medical officer, and a whole bunch of just incredibly talented, dedicated people said, let's try to apply this in people and see where we get. So this is a decade ago, beginning, but this is continuing to this day. Here's what it looks like now. Person's got a classic hemiparetic hand, it's all messed up, doesn't open right. She has trouble cutting her own food, it's embarrassing at restaurants. The therapist says, let's try it. The difference is the therapist's got a button, a clicker in their hand. And it's not just playing a sound, it's activating her vagus nerve. It goes to that computer. That computer goes and actively talks to the device implanted in her chest and stimulates the release of those neuromodulators to help her recover. Other people are good at cutting knives and forks, but they need help with bottles or moving balls back and forth or opening little tiny screw caps. We're going to individualize the therapy for each person, but in each case, there's a IPG, internal pulse generator, with a battery underneath their collarbone that's wired up there. That's how this works. It's not magic, it's wires. And here's what that thing looks like. There's a lead that runs up, and we were interested in whether or not stimulating the vagus nerve over and over with rehab could make people better. We ran a study, first published in Stroke in 2016. Half the people were randomized to get VNS and half didn't. The ones with VNS got better. But we thought, hold on a minute, they know who's who, because half of them don't have an implant. And so maybe they're just working hard because you got the implant and I really want to get better. So we repeated the study, now double-blinded. Everybody gets implanted, but we only turn it on half the people. This seems really mean, right? You see the same thing, but you put the device in their body, didn't turn on? What kind of people are you? But don't worry, it's not too late. We can repeat the same therapy with the same therapist, now with vagus nerve stimulation on, and they remake those same gains. But these are small studies, you'll say. 20, 17 people is not very many. Let's do 100, okay? 2021, we published a study in Lancet, the premier medical journal on the planet, and we're talking about highly significant, highly reliable gains. You want to be in the VNS group, not in the group that's working hard, that doesn't have the benefit of this release of neuromodulators. FDA looks at this data, looks at the incredible safety, and says, let's approve that as the first-in-class treatment for people with chronic upper limb, hand, and arm impairment after ischemic stroke. So they're very specific about what we did and what it's approved for. But the idea is now there's a new treatment where there wasn't before. And interventions for things like circuit disorders are not hopeless. What I'm most proud about is the work that other people did, not the work that I did. We repeated 4 times in randomized controlled trials as effect. But who cares? That's just people who are in randomized controlled trials. How about just regular people? So these 4 studies that have come out in the last couple of years are not study participants. They're just regular people who we measured them before and after in a regular hospital when they went out, got a prescription from their doctor, and you can see the benefits were the same as we saw before. So that's 8 replications of this basic finding that we found in rats. We made sure it worked well in rats, and it works and translates in people. Where do you go from there? You got to get it covered. This is America. You got Medicare, Medicaid, a lot of work to be done. You get private insurance. That's all taken care of now. That took some time. You got to get a lot of surgeons. Surgeons love doing surgery. Don't worry, we got 100 of them around the country all set up now. You can go and get this in any major metropolitan area. To date, the technology developed at UT Dallas has treated 1,000 people. We expect to treat another 1,000 next year. At UT Dallas, we thought, well, that's great doing that therapy. We're activating with the therapist, but could you do more? So first we tested how long these things last, and we went 155 days. They still got to keep their gains just like the rats did. But then we said, let's now turn it back on. Let's send them home with all this technology. Why do I need the therapist? Can't I have a video game that I can play? I'll show you that you can. And I'll show you we've published this year that they can make additional gains without ever having to go to the therapist. Can we improve this quality of this device? Rob Renneker looks at this device. It's pretty good, but I think we can do better. Let's get a team together. Let's raise some money from community foundations of Texas, and let's see what else we can do. Get together with the surgeons and the engineers. He takes the device on your right, Vivistem. Full disclosure, I'm a shareholder and consultant for that company. And he says, let's make something 50 times better. Why is it 50 times better? It's 50 times smaller. I don't want something big. I want something small. The device has many, many other attributes that make it preferable, less pain, easier to install, cheaper to make, all the rest. So here's what it looks like. It gets zip-tied onto your nerve. Put it in this little soft silicone cuff. It sits directly on the nerve. There's no wire running all the way. Just make the thing smaller if it sits right there. But it's so small, there's no battery. No problem. Put the battery on the outside. Your phone doesn't need a battery. You can charge it through the air. We do the same thing here. When you do therapy, you put this neckband on. That wakes the device up. And at the moment your hand opens a little bit, we reward those circuits with this brief burst of neuromodulators you don't even feel. And you strengthen those circuits. It takes hundreds and hundreds of times over many, many days. But over time, they make gains they cannot otherwise make. Here it is in the first person with spinal cord injury. We have her implanting. You can see all the hardware she's got. You can see how big her dental hardware is. We have a lot of metal. That tiny little thing is what Rob said. Let's just put this little thing. That's all we need. We zoom in. You can actually see every chip. All those transistors my dad was so interested in, those things are what make this possible. You can't just do this by magic, and you certainly can't do it with a pill. Here we're looking at it in cross-section. You can see the circuit board and the chips and the glass that surrounds it to keep it away from the salt water that's in your body that would ruin the transistors. Now we're looking at the MRI. If you're a trained eye, you'll immediately see this devastating injury, but you've probably not looked at these things that much. This is the spinal cord. I'm highlighting now, and you'll obviously be able to see this break. This is devastating injury. It's a car accident. But there's still a connection there. You guys can see it, right? Can we take the remaining connections, that fine little bridge, they call it, and make more progress than she currently had, the ability she had when she started in our study? So we began, again, grabbing another group of people. It's 2018 now. We're saying, let's try something else, not just stroke. Let's try other injuries. Chronic spinal cord injury, tetraplegia, cervical spinal cord injury, the most common kind. Got a bunch of people together to do it in rats, and then a bunch of people together to do it in humans. We said, let's go. Here's what it looks like a normal day up in BSB building just north of here. These are students working with a stroke patient and a spinal cord patient in our gym. They're receiving active stimulation. They're engaged with their little tablets, playing little games, and the computers are counting their reps. I don't have to have a therapist. We've got a lot of therapists, but they're going to go home. We're really just showing them how to do it on their own. They shouldn't need to be supervised. They play these fun video games. The bottom right is the repetition counter, but it's more fun to play Fruit Ninja or to practice typing with your fingers. And we're measuring the forces they're doing. When they're above average for them, we stimulate. That activates their Bluetooth, the wireless device around their neck. That activates the device inside their body. That strengthens the connections inside their brain and spinal cord. This is what therapy looks like. If you want to come into the office, I'm just rotating through each person. You'll see several different people. The therapist is in the background. Each hand's a little different. The strength, the impairment, the level of injury. But they're all playing these games. And they're all trying to pinch something or turn something or pick up tiny objects or lift their arm or swipe a touchscreen. All standard things you need to be able to do to exist in a modern world. All things that they struggle mightily to do. What we saw in our double-blinded controlled trial was published in Nature last year was more people made a meaningful response if they were in the active group than the sham group. And the more we did, the better they got. And when we sent them home, you ended up with 70% of individuals are making meaningful gains. Are they cured? No way. But they're making gains they couldn't make alone. There were no gains made with rehab alone, only when we added the vagus nerve stimulation. So here's one of our participants. First one to do it at home. He's in his living room. He's playing these games. He's getting real-time, phased, controlled activation of his vagus nerve. It doesn't hurt him. And doesn't have to drive all the way, get that power chair of his into the vein and drive all the way
from the other side of DFW to come here. We then measure the changes he makes. He makes significant gains in grasp. We did this again with people with stroke at home. Saw gains there. Just for context, they're not cured. These gains are meaningful. They've lost 15% of their disability. That's meaningful, but there's still work to be done. We're not finished yet. They say, these are the 6 things I want to be able to do. I want to be able to draw better. I want to be able to throw a bone to my dog. I want to be able to cut spaghetti. And we go ahead and make magic sand or zippers so that they can do that, so they can practice this and measure it and feed that information real time back to them and activate those nerves. We measure how fast they are before and after, and we see they get faster. For most of you, you need to see it to believe it. On the right is the after. How long does it take to zip a zipper? It takes you guys about 3 seconds, something like that. It takes him longer, 8 seconds. But before, it took him way longer. And we're going to speed this up because you're going to get really frustrated watching him fumble with this thing. It's really, really, really frustrating. But in 2 minutes, he's going to eventually get this thing to go. But it's super frustrating and just hard to keep up with your friends who are trying to get their work done. Other gentlemen wanted to do things like build. So you'll see on the right hammering little things. Not as quick as you would do it, but in a few seconds he's going to be able to get those nails in or screw that screw in. And we can compare how long it took before versus how long it took after. And we're saving time on activities they want to be able to do to have independence and dignity. Now you have to do all of this double-blinded or you don't know anything. You can't just show before and after and say they're better. Maybe they just tried really hard. We only want to do studies that are double-blinded, placebo-controlled, because there are many, many ways to fool ourselves. And some of them include placebo effect. Some of them include performance bias. You work harder with the ones. Assessment bias. I want them to be better. We can eliminate all that by having a pre-registered, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, multi-site trials. When we succeed on the next trial, if we do, this will be the next FDA-approved treatment from UT Dallas, in this case for cervical spinal cord injury. With some support from the state, we were able to bring these teams together and begin before we even had any money to do it. Last week, 2 days ago, I got notice from our colleagues at Wings for Life, Spinal Cord Injury Research Foundation, that they're willing to pay for half this trial. So we've got another $5 million in. We're almost done to be able to put this team, University of Texas system together to do something that's never been done before. A pivotal trial run with no company, just run by the investigators themselves, trying to figure out how to get to this small population of people with spinal cord injury and make an impact that isn't currently possible. And with support from the state and private foundations, we've made a lot of progress. Can we expand this to help people regain their mobility? A number of our students and colleagues have said, I want to try that. And it's pretty simple. We already activated the vagus nerve a lot, but we never activated the vagus nerve while they're moving their leg. So we just move the sensor there. Now the stimulation occurs when the foot moves, not when the hand moves. Pretty simple idea. Here's what therapy looks like. Here's individuals in PSP climbing stairs. Here we are walking around. Here we are doing these challenging kinds of tasks, stepping over objects, and we're measuring, when is your leg high? Stimulate right then. That's the circuit. That's the connection I need to provide. And let's see if we can make them better. So again, before on the left, after on the right, you'll see the highest that she could step up to, 33 degrees versus 83 degrees. That's a lot higher leg movement. You can get to a lot more places in life if you can get up a big curve versus barely able to get over a small curve. Same thing sitting down in a chair. We all take it for granted. You guys can all stand from your chairs or sit in your chairs. Many people cannot do that. But with practice and vagus nerve stimulation, they can make gains. Here we see walking speed. 0.2 meters per second is not very fast. And honestly, 0.6 meters per second is not very fast either. But I'd rather be twice the speed if people are trying to wait and keep up with me. He traveled to Japan and visited neighbors and family and was able to navigate even the railway stations alone. Here's the progress they made in the 6-minute walk test. You're talking about 100 meters more traveled. Not some little tiny thing, but you're now way up there. You're really far behind if you're 100 meters behind. And we can see that these things persist for 3 months after the end of stimulation. When we look at the changes, they get better at balance, they get better at speed, and they move from not being able to cross a traffic light to being able to cross a traffic light. Now, we'd like to do more than this. Just hand function alone is nice, but we want to add mobility, add bowel control, add sensation to improve the lives of people living with spinal cord injury. If it's speech after stroke, having hand function is good, but I still can't talk. Can we work on that? We think we can. We've already built the technology to have the stimulation now be, when do you find the word quicker? When do you say it louder or more articulately? All that's easy to do with modern speech recognition. With traumatic brain injury, the signature injury of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, people come back with 7 conditions on average. The average soldier has 7 different neurological and psychiatric conditions. Post-traumatic stress disorder is the one that most people know about. We thought, let's try that, see if we can make progress. Can we apply the same technology to treat chronic, untreatable mental illness? Krista McIntyre, Mark Powers, and a bunch of great graduate students and colleagues said, let's try that. Probably won't work, but let's try that again. Might work. We started in animals and made them afraid. We then made them so afraid that even when you extinguish them, play the sound alone, they're still afraid of it. They don't get over it. And then we added vagus nerve stimulation, and they could lose their fear. That was our hypothesis. Then we ran actual experiments and confirmed this basic idea. We can eliminate the fear of pathological fear that should go away when the problem is associated with it goes away, but in these individuals wouldn't go away. Now, with humans with PTSD, it's not that they're just afraid of something. It's also that they've got intrusions. They've got avoidant behavior. They've got heightened arousal. They have changes in their thoughts and feelings. We can do the same things in rats. We can look at them and see these animals now never go out on the arms of this elevated plus maze. They're jumpy. When you startle them, they jump twice a normal animal would jump. When you put new objects, in this case marbles, in their cage, they bury them and hide them. They're afraid of everything. Each time when we do vagus nerve stimulation, you'll see they return to naive or normal levels. The most surprising was that the animals even lost their preference to be with other animals. They became asocial. No preference, 0, as opposed to the normal, strong preference to be in the side of the cage with other animals. All those were restored when that core circuit dysfunction was treated. So we developed some applications, some software applications to record the therapy. This is called cognitive behavioral therapy or prolonged exposure therapies, more specifically. We record those sessions at home. The therapist pushes a button on the cell phone, activates the vagus nerve real time in the office during the session. This is all recorded on their cell phone. We then send them home and they replay the therapy session, which is them articulating in first person present tense the trauma that they experienced. They have to hear it over and over and over and over again. And we're going to add vagus nerve stimulation to that. We were worried it might make them better, it might make them worse, but it didn't in the rats. And we knew in human clinical trials of prolonged exposure therapy that you can make people quite a bit better. They can move from severe to only moderate PTSD on average, about a 10 or 15 point improvement in the clinician-administered PTSD score. We started off with a separate group. This is an open-label study, no control, but compared to historical controls, they look just like the original group. What we saw was a greater gain, and then when we looked at it 6 months later, we saw a loss of PTSD diagnosis. They don't have PTSD anymore. They don't meet the definition. This is not shocking. Normally, with prolonged exposure therapy, about 40% of people will have a great outcome and lose their diagnosis. That means 60% still have PTSD. The difference here is these patient populations have already had that therapy, and they didn't get better. These are treatment-resistant patients, and 100% of our patients got better in this small open-label study. We were able to look at all of their symptoms, and it wasn't just one thing that got better. All of the core diagnostic traits of PTSD improved. I'm proud to say we raised some funds now and here in UT Dallas, the partners at Baylor Scott & White and Dell Medical School in Austin. We're running a double-blind placebo control. Let's make sure this isn't placebo, make sure they're not just trying hard. And we've got, again, chronic treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder, standardized measures. Everyone will eventually get therapy, and then we're going to follow them for 12 months. We're not just going to wonder what happened. We're going to track them. Here are the individuals who are pushing this. You guys know about the Callier Center for Communication Disorders. What can we do for people with speech impairments? Rats don't talk, but we're making progress even there. To wrap up, what we're doing is building a platform technology, a new tool, like a wrench. If you don't have a wrench, you can't fix your car. You might need a wrench and a screwdriver and a hammer, but we're building that wrench at least. And we can modify that wrench by pairing it with different forms of therapy that other people develop. We didn't have to develop those. We add sensors so that we're now pairing it with sound therapy or speech therapy or movement therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. Those circuits that seemed like a death sentence before, we're now beginning to see them as the glass half full that they are. Most people still have connections. They're not cut. They're just damaged. And the people's lives are not over. They're just set back. But we need the tools to restore the remaining connections. And even if half are gone, half is a lot, because half is 75 trillion connections. That's got to be enough to do a lot. At the Texas Biomedical Device Center, our goal is to constantly be doing animal studies, engineering design, and clinical trials so that we can have the maximal clinical impact. That's our goal, that's our mission, that's what our founders wanted us to do, and that's what we do every day. At the University of Texas at Dallas, our team has been incredibly blessed by facilities like the ones you see around us, the ability to do our work without worrying about keeping the lights on or paying the bills or having somebody sneak in and steal our crap. We're encouraged to think big, to work together. It's 100 people up there. It's the whole floor of a building. Solve hard problems, really hard problems. And we're now spreading out across the country and across the world to find other like-minded teams to do the work we can't get to. There's just too much to do to get to schizophrenia, to get to major depressive disorder, to get to drug addiction. But that's okay. Polycarp Kusch reminded us, before he passed, no single achievement in science is possible without the painstaking work of the many hundreds who've built the foundation on which all new work is based. So the team has to be acknowledged, right? There's a lot of leadership. Adam mentioned leadership. Leadership's important. Chief Medical Officer, Chief Engineer, Seth Hayes helping us with every single thing we do, operations and regulatory, the clinical engineering team, the clinical team, preclinical team running these rat experiments. But that's a piece of the team. That happens to be the members of the Texas Biomedical Device Center, not including all the undergraduates who I don't have pictures of. But it's much, much bigger than that. This doesn't just happen with a couple people in a building. It has to be a building to begin with. We have to have the trash taken out. We have to have relations with our government in Austin and in Washington, D.C. We have to have people regulate us to make sure we're taking care of human subject protection and that our animals are well taken care of. We need help raising funds and even feeding the people in the lab who have to be nourished. We have people who help us with custodial services and ground crew. We have people who do receiving and budgeting. We need all that help. And we're blessed at UTD that on most days, it just works smoothly. There's hiccups, to be sure, but we make progress because this team supports the team we have, because our founding fathers told us we got big things to do. We need to stay out of each other's way, stay in our own lane, solve our own problems, and let everyone else do theirs. We had significant success with fundraising from a wide range of areas, and I'm really proud to mention today that this week Wings for Life has provided $5.7 million to support this work, and we're almost there for people with spinal cord injury. I want to remind you to think big, work together, and solve hard problems. I'm happy to take any questions. There are microphones if you've got a question. President Mogi has a question.
Just want to say thank you, Mike, for elevating our scholarship at this university. I am so impressed with not just your brilliance, but also the fact that you are such an amazing team scholar and that you express your gratitude to the village that's here with you. I am particularly excited by the question of how we put UT Dallas on the international map in terms of what bigger questions you and your team are dreaming of that are at the present time beyond our reach, and how we can use our strategic plan to take on big bets around those questions. I heard about the Dells putting $755 million yesterday, the news broke, in the Life Sciences Hub in Austin. And my question is, how do we create a Life Sciences Hub up in Dallas, around UT Dallas and our friends at UT Southwestern and the companies around and the small businesses around? Because what we have is we have over 30,000 students at UT Dallas. Some of these students are like you. They are audacious, they're impatient, they're restless, and we have to find ways to connect those restless people with an important cause. So if you can just perhaps dream bigger than you have been dreaming already. I mean, this is pretty big, but what does it look like for us to both put ourselves on the map and tell the world that we want to take on some big bets? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I was able to go to Pegasus Park 2 weeks ago before we went to our trip to Austria.
and speak with the director of ARPA-H, and she asked me the very same thing. Think of something bigger. And she said, specifically, what if you had infinite money? And I said, okay. What question would you ask? And I've learned to make the question short. And the question is, what if all brain diseases were treatable? What if all brain diseases were treatable? They're like what if questions. So the idea is all of them. There's no reason to believe there are any brain diseases that can't be treated. What I mean by treated is not masked, not the symptoms, but you're actually addressing the underlying pathology. So right now, schizophrenia is not really treated. You can mask it. Drug addiction, you can lock someone up, put them over here, but you can't really rewire those circuits. And so that's a paradigm shift. I'd like to break down the barriers between mental illness and neurological illness. This is completely artificial between psychiatry and neurology. So I put in a proposal to ARPA 2 weeks ago for a $120 million ask. ARPA-H, sorry. And we'll see. They thought that was pretty good. But putting it together requires team building. How does that happen? Right now, the two models we have, one is microtransponder, it's just changed its name to Mobia, that Vivistem product. That was pretty small, right? 1,000 people. That's not that big, one company. But the proof is in the pudding. Once the first one is there, it's much easier for everybody after that. So Rob has been working hard with venture capitalists, trying to find this community of people, help them understand what's possible. Clean energy? Sure, that's a big deal. But what about healthcare? 18% of GDP? Probably a pretty big market, but you got to have an intervention that's cost effective. Rob makes thousands of these devices very inexpensively. So I don't think it's going to break our system. I think it's going to expand our system. I think it'll put the United States back on top with biotechnology. And it'll change the way we think about mental illness. The stigma will be gone. When someone heard voices, you think they're crazy. Let's throw it away. They're demons. We change that now, but we still can't do anything about it. Once you can intervene, I think it'll change everything. And we'll have work to do about the ethics of this. Do you force someone to get their brain changed or not? We have experts here in that kind of work. The engineering aspects of this, what other pieces do you do? Personal freedom aspects, legal aspects, school of management aspects, there's biochemistry aspects, there's chemical aspects. So I view this as requiring the entire university, and in fact, to your point, requiring an entire system of universities, not just University of Texas at Dallas, but our partners at Medical Branch, our partners at Tyler. Jane Wigginton's done a great job bringing them on board because we have a common vision of, it's not about me, it's about them. And so the participants are going to come, but you got to get the institutions aligned, get the lawyers out of the way, no offense to the lawyers in the audience, but we had to make it work and not worry about getting into trouble because these people are already in trouble.
Great talk. Does the time after injury impact, like when you start to give these therapies? That's my first question. The other is, are there any kind of neuromodulators that you could be co-treating these people with that improves the outcome?
Two great questions. The first question is, no, it doesn't matter how long it's been. There's a big surprise. You would have thought someone who's 10 years post-stroke versus 1 year, better to be earlier. No correlation whatsoever. Same gains no matter how far. No correlation with right or left side, no correlation with age, no correlation with sex. Didn't make any difference. We did 100 people, it's not, we don't know. So there's not at least a strong correlation. And that's really hopeful, right? That means you have time. The circuits are still there. They just haven't found the path back to recovery. In terms of additional pharmacotherapy, that's what we pitched to ARPA-H. Yes, of course, biochemistry is fantastic. I have a degree in biochemistry. We'd love to use that. Now that we've got timing coming from one source, you can combine it with another. And so some beautiful work that's been done recently, we've just patented. There are some neuromodulators that when they get too high, they shut the whole thing down. And so there's some antagonists you could apply that help prevent you from going over the inverted U and turning on the brakes when you want to have the gas. Great question.
So I also observed that back in 2018, ChatGPT, AI could only hold 100 billion some connections, right? And in just 3 years later, it's almost over 100 billion. So how many connections, if you could, predict if by, let's say, the end of the 20th decade, like 4 years from now?
Yeah. So I don't know, but my prediction is it won't make that much more difference. The key is not the number of connections, it's the information. We have a lot of information in the human lifetime, and it takes trillions of synapses to store them. ChatGPT is trained on all the information we have, which is everything we've ever written for 1,000 years. In the next 5 years, we will write 5 more years worth of books, which is good, but it's not that much. So it's possible it won't be that much, Others predict, no, there'll be an exponential effect, it'll be giant. I don't know, we'll have to find out. It would be hard for Polycarp Kusch to predict that there will suddenly be speed of light transmission from every continent across the internet, but it does exist. So I don't know is the short answer. Great question.
Hi, so maybe this is an ignorant question. You'll have to forgive that. I come from physical sciences where we think about material limitations. For example, a battery can only be charged and discharged a finite amount of times before it breaks down. So with these neural circuits, you're providing this exogenous stimulation. Even on a hypothetical level, is there any chance for like these circuits to break down or to atrophy?
We were really worried that we would push the circuit toward one thing and get worse at something else. So we did a lot of measurements early on. Now we're not that worried about it, we just haven't seen it. So the safety has been excellent, but you're right. We're now doing experiments beginning to see if you overuse it, does it cause a problem? Absolutely. It's once again an inverted U. You have to do spaced repetition. This is meat, right? This is biology. It's not a machine. So if you go faster, you don't get the same outcomes. You have to have sleep cycles specifically. You only make so much progress per day. That's actually good. It means you can stop. You don't need 8 hours of therapy a day. You could do 20 minutes of therapy a day and be done. And so that uses your time more efficiently and allows you to use those sleep cycles effectively.
Yeah, it looks like just from watching you're using a chip to simulate the nerve. But for different things you're trying to do, what do you do differently? How do you know how to use the chip to do a signal for different things?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. All these kinds of therapy, we have no knowledge. We invite the experts. If I'm teaching to read, I get a first grade teacher. If I'm doing occupational therapy, I get a physical therapist or occupational therapist. So in each of these cases, we have not done anything to find the form of therapy. What's interesting is that the therapists themselves don't know which kind of thing is better because they all do the same thing, which is not much. Now that we have a tool to make the therapy work better, we can now keep the vagus nerve stimulation the same and compare two kinds of therapy. Should you do more simple exercises or more connected exercises? Does that make sense? Should you do more strength exercises or more range of motion exercises? I don't know, and we don't know. Football coaches will say you need to do some simple stuff, some drills, but also to play the game. So probably it's both, but that might be wrong. The order might be simple first, then complicated, or it might be the other way around. So there's a new opening once we can make changes that are larger in these individuals to learn more about the practice that makes perfect if you have the vagus nerve stimulation.
This will probably need to be the last question.
Thank you for sharing all the information that you did. On the motor activity improvements because of the stimulation, are you aware of, or have you conducted studies on getting improvement in essential tremors, which is sort of like the opposite, where there's excess movement and you want to restrict movement? Just curious.
It's a great question. So central tremor is, you see someone at church in our choir who does this, and you see her holding the thing, and it's just really frustrating. Imagine what it'd be like, your hand's just always doing this, drives you crazy. In principle, it's the simplest possible thing. We would wait and feed back. We'd measure that frequency of oscillation and feed back when they're in a below average state. In practice, we've never tried. Why not? From President Bogey's point of view, we didn't have funds. We didn't get a grant on that. There's lots of things, there's more things we haven't tried than we have tried. So it might be easy, or it might be incredibly tricky. We don't really fully understand the dynamics of all these networks. We have models, but they're pretty simple. But at least now we can use it to test. So what's cool is not only could we treat it, maybe, but if we did treat it, then we would learn that how it worked is how we thought it worked. And that's that positive feedback cycle where you're now using it to test the brain's function and develop mathematical models of the brain. Currently, there are very few effective mathematical models, and so we just kind of try stuff. We'd like to move to a mode in the not-too-distant future where there's lots of computational neuroscience helping to inform what the physical therapist is trying and using these new counterintuitive ideas. If we only try what's intuitive, we're doomed to fail. No one would have thought about fiber optics around the globe. That doesn't make any sense, right? But what's cool about science is it leads us to these new paths of things that are counterintuitive, that shouldn't work. We try those anyway. And now we've got internal combustion engines, we can fly to the moon and all the rest. So I like it because it gives you an obvious choice, which probably won't work, which then means when that doesn't work, we try something else. When that does work, we now have a better model, and that's how we imagine this loop to go around. Great question.
Let's thank Professor Kilgard for a most engaging talk. On an on an incredibly important topic. And thank you to all of his team members, too, who are here in the room and not in the room today. Thank you.